Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll get started in just a minute. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. Welcome, everyone. It's good to see everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll get started in just a minute here. All right, everyone. Well, welcome. Thanks so much for joining our Hasbara leadership session. We're here in middle of May 15th, which for many of you have been on these leadership sessions here, which we've started to do now every couple of months, which are really a great opportunity here to get everyone together virtually and just do continuing education for our Hasbara network, both our Hasbara students and our Hasbara donor network and community members. It's a great chance to actually get everyone together. As most people on the call know, what we do at Hasbara is we empower and educate Jewish and other pro-Israel university students from around the U.S. and Canada, and we've always done that primarily through our missions to Israel. We take student leaders to Israel for 16 days at a time, and which has always created a little bit of a challenge to really get our donor network and our student network in the same place at the same time. And now that we've been doing these virtual leadership sessions, it's a great opportunity to do that. And so I want to really thank everybody for joining. And I want to especially thank the student leaders who take the time out of your busy schedules to be involved in our work, to stand up to the anti-Semitism that we see on college campuses, and to do your best to make a change. And so thank you for joining us. My name is Alan Levine. Those of you who haven't met me, I'm the CEO of Hasbara International, and I want to introduce our guest, who I have a lot of questions for you, Laser. But I'll just start with a brief introduction, and we'll do this. I'll ask questions for the first 20-25 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to the audience and have a conversation here with you, Laser. So Laser Berman is the diplomatic correspondent for the Times of Israel, and he actually served in the Israeli military twice, including having commanded a Bedouin unit during his IDF service. And he also served on faculty of university in Iraqi Kurdistan. Is that right, Laser?
That is correct. That is
very curious to hear about. And I studied Kurdish, and of course is fluent in English and Hebrew. And really, I think what the part of your bio I really want to ask you about is all your recent travels. He was just with the foreign minister of Israel in New Delhi, India, and was with Prime Minister Bennett when Naftali Bennett served as Prime Minister here in Washington, and has been in Ukraine 4 times, all on behalf of the Times of Israel. And so he's really, I can't think of anybody better to really give us a briefing here on what is happening in Israel, what we can look forward to, and really how we should be thinking about the current events. So Laser, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
And thank you. And I just want to thank all the participants, especially the students on campuses. Certainly, I'm in conversation with Israeli diplomats every day, and the subject of campuses and kind of what people think across the world is something that is of great concern, and it's not someplace that Israeli diplomats can be at all times. So the work that you folks are doing is crucially important. And again, this comes up every time I speak to foreign ministry officials. So thank you for all that you're doing as well.
Thank you, Laser. And I forgot to mention maybe the newest addition to your bio, which is that you'll be speaking to our Hasbara students in Jerusalem next Monday at the Knesset. So I guess I couldn't mention that yet because that hasn't happened. But on Monday, you'll be greeting the first of our Hasbara delegations that are coming to Israel this summer. Three of them on their way, and so thank you in advance for that, Laser. So
Sure.
So the topic today was unity in the era of judicial reform, and we're going to talk about judicial reform and what's been happening sort of internally in Israel. But I'd be remiss if I didn't just start by mentioning the recent rocket attacks coming out of Gaza, and all of us, I think I speak for everyone on this call when I say we were concerned, and we've had our brothers and sisters in Israel in our thoughts and prayers, and many of us have been in bomb shelters on our visits to Israel, and so want to just kind of offer a thought. And my first question really to you, Laser, is how are you?
Sure, thank you.
How are you hanging in there?
I've been through worse, as they say, unfortunately. This is, I think anyone that follows Israel knows that this is something that is starting to happen every year. It's a reminder of the serious neighborhood that we're in and the complex nature of the challenges we face, whether it's from Gaza, whether it's Hamas, at sometimes this time Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Then you look north, Hezbollah. Of course, the Iran issue is one that kind of colors everything in the region. So this is certainly not the worst of the rounds of violence that we've seen, but it's a challenge that I think Israel has yet to solve. I think it's something that our leaders need to really pay attention to and come up with some new ideas. But thank God, this one seems to have gone by relatively smoothly, and we'll hope that the ceasefire continues to last and that we have more time until the next round.
Right, and I'm glad to hear that you're okay, and obviously we all the families that have been affected by the rocket fire and recent violence. We keep them all in our thoughts and prayers, and I am proud to just report to everybody that the first group of Hasbara fellows going to Israel this summer landed this morning in Israel. So 40 students, and we have 40 more student leaders coming next week, and proud to say that not a single cancellation. We had some worried phone calls from parents, but we're there, and especially at this time, it's important to show solidarity with Israel, and I'm happy to tell you that we have a group on the ground now, and so obviously keeping everybody's safety in our thoughts and prayers. So let's jump into our topic, which is judicial reform and seeking unity. I mean, I think my first question is there hope for some sort of compromise? And if so, how do we get there?
Absolutely. So from the beginning, I think I've been an outlier in that I've been relatively undisturbed by the fact that there is a very significant, a very pointed, at times irresponsible in terms of the language, debate going on over an issue that touches at the heart of what Israel is and the structure of Israeli democracy. I think it's a healthy thing for there to be these type of discussions. I think it's a healthy thing for people to take to the streets, among other tools, to try to influence policy. I think it's a long needed and something in a debate that had to happen a while ago. As we know, Israel does not have a constitution. It's not unique among democracies. The UK doesn't have one either. But I think structurally, there are some things that we have to pay attention to in Israeli democracy, and it's a good time to have those conversations now. I don't necessarily think that unity as such is something that is this ultimate goal in a democracy. Israel has been somewhat unique in that there really has been a lot of unity around core principles, fundamental pillars about military service, the Jewish and democratic character of the state, trust in the security organs, the need to absorb Aliyah and to support that. So I think Jerusalem is certainly a consensus issue across most of the spectrum. So I think the idea of unity is important here in that some people were concerned that there are new cracks in unity. And certainly we can look at things like some reservists, a very small percentage, bringing their own military service into the debate, which I think is irresponsible, and kind of rhetoric that goes beyond the normal rhetoric that you hear in political fights in terms of, the end of Israeli democracy and dictatorship. Now, that type of discussion is to be expected in democracies, right? We have to remember that when Lapid and Bennett were in power, you had a Netanyahu-led opposition whose goal What's the opposition's goal? To bring down government, have new elections, get into power. I think the current opposition would like to do the same thing, and they've played their hands very skillfully. But I want to emphasize that this is a serious discussion about the balance of power between different branches of government in Israel. And it's an important discussion. And without a constitution, there's not really rules of the game. And that's why some of this debate has been kind of over the top and free flowing. And I think it's important to discuss this. Now, along the way, I've always felt that both sides were negotiating without actually sitting at the same table. So the rights, or the governments, let's call it, their leverage is the fact that they can move legislation forward, and they indeed move legislation forward quickly until late March. And that was their way to pressure the opposition to say, come to the table. We're happy to talk to you. We've been ready throughout, but just come talk to us. But we're not going to stop legislation until, as a precondition. The opposition's leverage was that, look, we can mobilize much of Israeli society. We have the ability to bring out 19 straight weeks of massive demonstrations. We can even get foreign leaders to start getting involved in Israeli domestic politics. We can get a credit rating agency to shake it up a little bit. So we can really undermine the confidence in this, and we can even start putting cracks in this right-wing coalition. I think they've been very skillful in doing so. We know that the sides have been able to talk at the president's residence in Jerusalem. It's not really clear where those are going to go, but it's also not clear whether the legislation is going to even advance now. There are reports today that Netanyahu would rather see the legislation halted, that the justice minister has to threaten him that he might leave if it's not passed by July at the end of this current session. So let's not forget, nothing has been passed. There's a lot of debate about it, and I think there is not even consensus among the government about what they would see. I will say this, though. Across Israeli society, I think you would see a consensus that there needs to be some kind of reform, and polls show that. The question is, what are the parameters of the reform, and what are the things that are really beneath the surface that are making people nervous, that are bringing people to the street? Because I don't think hundreds of thousands of people are coming out to the streets for ideas of jurisprudence and judicial theory. There's things beneath that, and I'm happy to explore that if that interests you as well.
That was going to be my follow-up question here, Laser. What is the reason for the intensity? Are there other things on people's mind? Are there specific politicians that are making people passionate about coming out to the streets, or is it just judicial? The policy of the policy debate and the what is really a political theory debate here, right? About the branches of government is what is it that's really animating people here?
Sure. And I would like to see more political theory debate in Israel and more theory debate in general, because it's a very, it's a society that looks at action instead of theory. And you can see that in the IDF as well. So it's nice that there is a theoretical debate that is coming here. But again, I don't think that's the real issue. On the right, or let's say the proponents of the reform, this is a longstanding desire. They make a claim which is right. I think the opposition also makes a claim that is right. They say this: democracy at its fundamental core means that the desire of the nation, or the majority of the nation, whether it's 51% or 78%, is reflected in public policy. And they, since 77, since Likud came to power under Begin, have won the majority of elections. And yet they find time and again that though their priorities pass through the legislative process, through the representative of the people in the Knesset, time and again, they're stymied by this Supreme Court. And they look at the Supreme Court and they say, wait a minute, who gave the Supreme Court power to overturn Knesset laws? There's no Knesset mandate for this. There's no law for that. It's something that the court decided itself. It also sees that the court has decided that certain laws passed by the Knesset, which were never meant to be constitutional laws, or laws that other laws have to live up to. The court decides that these laws are now constitutional laws without ever being given that mandate. It decides, the court itself decides who can petition the Supreme Court, So if you have in the if I know there's a lot of Canadians here, but if the U.S. system, there's this very limited, and most democracies is very limited who can petition, and they also have a lot of control over who gets selected to the Supreme Court. So they would say, right, there's this group of people, they would call them elitists, who are setting their own priorities, and it's further and further from the desires, the priorities of the people, which is anti-democratic. Now, on the other side of the opposition, who say, listen, democracy is more than just majoritarianism. You also have the protection of minority rights so that the majority cannot steamroll minorities and do whatever it wants. And since Israeli democracy is so direct in that there's one house that you vote for once, like there's only one way to express your political desires. You just vote with one vote. You don't get to choose, between prime minister, between president, and between the Knesset. The Knesset then, from the Knesset comes the government. So the Knesset really doesn't have a ton of power. So you have this super powerful government. The Knesset has very limited ability and desire to check that. So the only check on this powerful government is the Supreme Court, and therefore it needs to be distant from the people, and it needs to be a check on the people. Now, additionally, the left won't say this, but I think this is true, that anyone that knows Israeli history will be familiar with the fact that the people who ruled the country in its early decades came from this Ashkenazi secular left, this labor left. With time, the demographics had shifted, and Israel is becoming more religious. You see more power in terms of political influence from those who are from Middle Eastern and North Africa countries, Mizrahim. And you see power by another minority, the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox. And you put these together, I think some people in the opposition say, wow, Israel is shifting away from the Israel that I knew. Its priorities are shifting somewhat. And the thing that will keep Israel as a prosperous economy, and some might even say as a democracy, which I think is overstated, is the Supreme Court. That's why they are so determined to make sure that there is a full independence on the Supreme Court. So again, almost every fight, whether it's between people or in politics, is really about some deeper things. And these deeper things are important. They're important issues. But I think that is the reason why so many people are coming out to the streets, and it's not purely or not mostly a political theory debate.
And how many of the people would you say, or to what degree are some of these protesters really out there protesting against specific politicians?
Well, the specific politician I think that hangs over all of Israeli politics for the past decade plus is Benjamin Netanyahu. For the opposition, which includes the right, let's not forget that the majority of parties in the Knesset are on the right, even when Netanyahu is out of power. But there are also many of the right-wing parties and the right-wing politicians are anti-Netanyahu. So there is a desire to see him move on from politics. Some say that he is corrupt. Some say that he's just been in there too long and we need new blood. And some say that you can't trust him. So you had someone like Gantz who made a coalition with him and then went back on. So there's really very limited ability for Netanyahu to create new coalitions besides what he has now. So I think Netanyahu triggers a lot of feeling among a lot of the Israeli opposition, but also on his supporters' side. There are people who say only Netanyahu is willing to go to fight for us, to fight for the certain socioeconomic classes, to fight to protect the Haredim. Only Netanyahu can face down Iran. So there's a lot of personality politics going on here, which isn't unique to Israel by any stretch. You can think about what happens, let's say, in the U.S. with Trump, right? There's people who feel like he's the big defender and people think he's the big authoritarian or worse. But I think that's part of it. And Netanyahu's presence really is the dominating fact of Israeli electoral politics.
And Liz, I noticed that you didn't mention two new politicians, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, which and I wonder if am I reading into it too much if I say, Laser, you didn't mention them. Are they not on Israelis' minds as much as they're on the minds of people here in North America? Yeah,
I mean, listen, we had consistent protests against Netanyahu during Corona before he was out of office. And those basically have continued now that he's back. I think Netanyahu evokes much more feeling and much more activity than do Ben-Gvir and Smotrich. Just a couple words about Ben-Gvir. We all know what his views are, and their way to the right, and certainly many are certainly against liberal values. A couple of elections ago, he didn't register there was elections. He just didn't come close to even get into Knesset. The fact that there has been a rise, I think there are certainly people who are on the far right in Israel, just like there's far right successes in Italy and in Sweden and France, and those are certainly democracies. At the same time, there are problems that he said he can solve, or that he is speaking to, that your traditional politicians have not solved, whether that's crime. Certainly crime within the Arab community. You have Arab communities asking for more state presence to deal with crime, in their communities. Whether it's questions in the South in terms of Bedouins' relations with the state. These are things that people are concerned about. They're serious policy issues. I think the can has been kicked down the road by a lot of the more acceptable or mainstream politicians. So people said, okay, we're going to get a lot of people. Let's give Ben-Gvir a chance. I don't see he's been especially effective or focused on solving these issues. But I think that is a reason to see his very rapid rise. And if he doesn't solve them, I think we'll see him disappear just as quickly.
It's interesting because and we didn't plan any of this before, but your last point that you think he'll disappear pretty quickly here. It's something I've kind of been saying privately a little bit. Not that we, of course, at Hasbara do not take a position at all on Israeli democracy or the choices of Israeli voters. But I've been getting questions frequently for the last however long this government's been in power, over the last semester at school, certainly. Questions from our students about how do we deal with these claims from the Students for Justice in Palestine and the BDS movement and others who were kind of using Ben-Gvir and Smotrich to say, see, we told you Israel's racist or Israel's apartheid or worse. And of course, our job is to help our students respond to those things. And our position, first of all, is nothing that an Israeli government could do. First of all, nothing justifies intimidating Jewish students on your campus. Right? First of all, of course, tearing off mezuzahs from dorm rooms, refusing to write letters of recommendation to students that are studying abroad in Israel. None of that is acceptable ever. But secondly, there is really, I think, all of this sort of highlights what the health of Israel's democracy, right? And like you said, it's you don't have to agree with the views of these two particular politicians to see that Israel's really not alone. We've had similar trends in Europe. Certainly in Europe, and you could argue in the United States politically. And if you've watched Israel's politics over the last 20 years or so, it just seems no one really sticks around unless your name is Netanyahu. I think sort of the U.S.-Israel relationship, the Canadian-Israeli friendship, it transcends anything that can happen in any given election.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, and again, there are trends that are going across the democratic world that there's no reason that Israel should not be part of them. And there is a certain sector of Israeli society that is more to the right, and that is reflected in elections, as is what happens in democracies. In a healthy democracy, there will be breaks on what they can do. And some of the breaks are the fact that the coalition is the Likud party, which is not a far-right party, which is a center-right party. And then, have they tried to do anything that is crazy, that the people who are most afraid of what they might do might try? Really, they haven't, and that's why you have a court, and that's why this debate over the court is so important. So I think it's certainly the function of a normal society that you have some unsavory elements. Some of them have a following, and the consensus in Israeli society is that this is not a big part of Israeli society, and the big part of Israeli society falls across the center, whether it's a little to the right, a little bit to the left, and they're having an important ideological fight on the streets. No one's getting injured. No one's been told they can't talk, and it's passionate, important politics, and I think that's what happens in vibrant democracies.
Will this, in your view, is there a risk to Israel's foreign relations at all with this? Is there a real long-term risk? obviously we've seen foreign politicians make comments, but is there a real long-term risk in your view?
I don't think I think some people have overstated a long-term risk. There's certainly concern from some countries. Those countries, well, I'll split them. There's democratic countries in the West. We've heard from the Biden administration has been very critical. I remember when Anthony Blinken, the Secretary of State, came and he kept talking about, the importance of consensus. To my ears, that's kind of a strange statement because democracy does not have to work on consensus. It works on processes and institutions, and you don't need consensus necessarily, and so you don't have that in the United States. There are countries which have been quite vocal. Germany was very vocal. I was there in Berlin when Netanyahu and Olaf Scholz, who had a very nice private meeting, were kind of debating the issue in front of the journalists, in front of the cameras. That was something you don't see very often. And Macron, had a pointed conversation with Netanyahu, but that didn't dominate the conversations in any way. And there are plenty of European countries that really, this is not what interests them. There's much more important issues in the bilateral. So in terms of Israeli tech, Israeli defense, all sorts of type of water cooperation, agriculture. So certainly other things that they want. And of course, the big issue in Europe right now is Russia, Ukraine. So whatever criticism a European minister wants to level toward Israel, they have much more important problems, which shows the scale of the concern over Israel is really not that much. Israel's other group of important partners are Arab states. So you have Egypt and Jordan, which I don't think are especially concerned by judicial. They certainly don't care about the structure of Israel's judiciary. That's not on their mind. They probably, I would say Jordan especially is concerned about, they're really concerned about Jerusalem and their own status in Jerusalem. And when Smotrich does things like stand, in front of that map that showed without Jordan, that upsets them. Or when Ben-Gvir went up to the Temple Mount, those are the type of things that touch off the Jordan relationship. Israel and Jordan are important security partners and they're strategic partners, and they're not going anywhere. It's a tough relationship, and it's it's never going to be a perfectly rosy one, but it's one that is stable. It's not going anywhere. Egypt we've seen the positive role that Egypt plays, especially in these Gaza things. Egypt is the key mediator, and relations, I think, continue to improve with Egypt. Then there's the Abraham Accords countries. The ones in the Gulf, so UAE, Bahrain, and then you can have Saudis kind of standing on the sideline and just keeping a careful eye. They would like to see stability in Israel. Again, they don't care about the nature of Israel's judiciary at all. They want to see Israel that is strong and stable. They want to see a partner that they know that they can rely on, that isn't going to cause them any trouble in on their own streets. So they would like to see certainly a strong Netanyahu. They signed the accords with Netanyahu, and they would like to see him as at the head of a strong coalition, a country that is stable financially, that when they make deals with Israel, they know that they're going to be honored and they're going to get the returns that they want, and an Israel that is able to invest in them as they move away from an energy-based economy to something that's more diverse and more varied. I think Morocco too. I don't think Morocco is especially concerned, again, about the judicial structure, but they would like to see a strong Israel. And I think all these countries especially want to see an Israel that has a good relationship with the United States. The Biden administration has taken a lot of Arab countries to task over their human rights records, and these are American allies, and they want, and this is explicit, they want Israel who has better access in the halls of power in Washington, D.C., to be able to make their case for them. And it's harder for Israel to do that when you see things like Biden hasn't invited Netanyahu yet. So it's important that bilateral relationship between the U.S. and Israel, which is very strong, of course, when there are things on the surface that show some slight tension, I think it worries Israel's Arab partners because they want to see Israel going to bat for them in Washington.
And I did want to ask about Israel's relations in North America here. And Prime Minister Trudeau about a month ago, I haven't seen a comment. Please bring it to my attention if I missed it, but I haven't seen a comment on judicial reform specifically. But he did make a critical comment about a month ago on what the quote was, on the rhetoric coming out of the Israeli government. And of course, the White House has signaled sort of an unwillingness to meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu here at this time while the protests are going on. And you answered the long-term risk, but will a short-term chilling of relations here have long-term effects? I mean, is this a critical time with Iran getting close to the bomb, and what might be happening that we're not thinking of here?
Again, I'm pretty optimistic about this. I think that the especially defense, if you're talking about defense and security, the relationship between Israel and the U.S., is strong and only gets stronger and has never been better. I don't think there's long-term structural problems with the U.S.-Israel relationship. Netanyahu will get his invite, and people say the right things. But yeah, hopefully it happens sooner rather than later. In terms of Canada, yeah, there was comments, I think, in early April, during some of the tensions around Temple Mount, Ramadan, which were somewhat critical of Israel. But Canada in general is one of the reliable English-speaking nations that Israel can rely on in multilateral institutions and international bodies. So you have US, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, who are reliable supporters of Israel. And if just Canada is really up there. So you usually see them, being a reliable supporter. Israel has switched. The Israel ambassador was a political appointment by Lapid. He's coming back, and Israel is sending a new ambassador over soon. Israel also has missions in Montreal and Toronto, so it's an important relationship, and I don't think there's anything to be concerned in the long term about the Israel-Canada relationship. And in general, Israel's relationships are getting better. So you see countries in Europe, which generally have been quite critical, like Sweden, let's say, has been moving closer to Israel, getting much more critical of Iran. Sweden is probably joining NATO, so they're going to expand their military by, I think, spending by about fivefold, and Israel is going to be an important partner there as well. Country like Turkey, which was Israel's regional ally beyond Iran, they weren't rival. They weren't an enemy in any way, but they were certainly a problem for Israel and other countries. Well, no matter whether Erdogan wins these elections or not, that relationship is not going anywhere. The trade relationship never ended, and the ambassadors are back. So I think there's fewer and fewer countries which are hostile to Israel. The ones that are hostile to Israel are really part of that Iran-Russia axis, and that is not one that most countries in the region really want to be part of at all. So, most Arab countries, even if they haven't signed with Israel yet and they're waiting for better opportunities, the idea of being allied with Iran, Syria, Hamas, Russia is certainly not especially attractive to them.
Laser, thank you. And I'm going to ask one more question here, and then we'll open it up to everyone. And if you want to get your questions ready, please do so. To ask a question, feel free to write it in the chat. Excuse me, on the chat here at the bottom of Zoom, or you can raise your hand. If you just click reactions on the bottom of your screen, click raise hand. We'll call on you and let you turn your camera on and come on and ask your question here. And lastly, you can also email them for those of you listening out of the Zoom room, just leadership@hasbarafellowships.org. So feel free to do that. Laser, I just want to ask you, we're on 90 plus campuses. We work with student leaders across Canada and the US, and sometimes it feels a little isolating. You're on a college campus, and certainly the hostile campuses, we've seen this activity calling for boycotts of Israel, and there was an Israel apartheid week again this year, right? But at the same time, you get to travel abroad with Israeli government officials, and I think you've seen. Correct me if you wouldn't describe it this way, but I think you are gotten to witness sort of Israel really making progress and achieving a lot of goals in its foreign relations. I know you were just in New Delhi, India last week with the foreign minister. I know you've been to Ukraine 4 times, and obviously we've seen the Abraham Accords happen. So talk to us just about that kind of what we might perceive as irony, right? Because we're always thinking about sort of the hostile elements here on North American college campuses, making us at least feel isolated as Jews and Zionists. But the headlines if you look at the pattern the last couple of years, we've seen sort of the opposite happen. Really, Israel creating new relationships all over the world, and you've had a front row seat. So, Tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So I recognize it can be very isolating and somewhat given a distorted image of where Israel stands in the world on college campuses. I remember my own time on college, and it can be, distressing emotionally, otherwise as well. But I think we have to remember that what happens on a college campus is not necessarily the same dynamics that happen in the world. I've been to many countries in the past few years, and you see the currency that the name of Israel has and the respect that people have for Israel, whether it's from the security sector, whether it's from Israeli tech, whether it's just fascination with Israel, whether it's for religious reasons as well. I mean, the most Zionists in the world are Christians, right? And we might think of that as, kind of an American white Southern thing, but that's, the vast majority of Christian Zionists are not that. You look at what's going on in the Asia Pacific region in places like Korea, the Philippines. There's some serious policies that are being changed because so much of the country is supportive. Countries like Fiji might move their embassy to Jerusalem because parties that are Christian Zionist parties are in the coalition. South America, that is certainly a reason why you have Central and South American countries who have moved their embassies and are talking about moving their embassies. And then you look around the Middle East, and I think countries, besides the few that I mentioned that are part of this Iran axis, see Israel as part of the solution, right? They certainly don't see Israel as a threat anymore. This isn't the 60s, this isn't the 70s, even though some people like to look back and don't want to get into the modern times. But these countries who want to have a successful economy, they want to be safe from terrorist groups or from Iran's nuclear ambitions, and they want to have a better relationship with Europe. They want to do some energy transition. They want to have a good relationship with the United States for sure. Israel is certainly part of the solution there. And there's so much cooperation going on that we don't see, that we can't talk about, that, even they try to hide from people like me because I'll tell the world. But even the stuff that we can tell about, you talk to officials in these countries, and it's inevitable that they will have relationships with Israel, the ones that haven't even been there yet. You see Israelis walking around the UAE all the time doing business there. I walked around there with a kippah and not a single problem at all. Then you can go into Europe and country, let's say like the Ukraine, right? Like Ukraine. And that's a country where Israel's been out of step with a lot of Europe, but hasn't been out of step with the region at all. You mentioned Israel. People they have only respect for Israel, and and if they're not related to people that live in Israel or haven't been there, they know plenty about it. The policies they might disagree with at some level, but Israel certainly is seen around the world as a place that is unique, that should be respected, that countries aspire to, that different religious groups, not only Jews, aspire to. And you mentioned Kurdistan, where I lived for a while. Kurds are Sunni Muslims mostly. The ones I lived with were in Iraq, and they see Israel and the Jewish story there as their big inspiration. If the Jews could carve out an independent, successful state in the Middle East, then we have hope to do it as well. And I think that's important to remember.
Fascinating. And we'll be opening it up for questions here in just a minute, if you'd like to raise your hand or leave a question here in the chat. Let's take our first question here. It's we have Mr. Singh. I see you've raised your hand. Welcome, and thanks for joining us. And please go ahead. You can just unmute and ask your question. I believe you're muted still.
Thank you for correcting me. Hi, actually, I was on mute. So my question is from the last topic, that Kurds are inspired from the Jews, that if they are able to carve out their nation, the same thing is happening in the region of North India, or in the region which is anti-Israel, or and they are not ready to debate on the issue of Jews, or we can say it about Palestino-Israeli conflict. So I think it's like an isolation for those nations as well. And why it is a reason that other ethnic minorities in this region are not able to carve out their nation, and Israel is it's like Pakistan is a Muslim country, but predominantly it's a Punjabi society, and they were carved out in 1947 by the same forces that were those were involved in the creation of Israel, like the British forces. So it's like an inspiration for all Punjabis instead of their religion, whether they're Muslims or Sikhs or Hindus, that they can carve out their nation as well, like Jews. Okay. So my question is, what kind of a program is helpful for for those Punjabis who are ready to discuss about Zionism and Israeli policies in the region of north of the Indian subcontinent?
Sure, I think so. If I understood the question, it's what can other minorities who are looking for their own national expression of their national aspirations learn from the Israeli story. I think there are some things that made Israel successful. One, they had a they had a good relationship with many countries in Europe, and especially support of powers like the United States is crucial if you are going to bring about a change in geopolitics and carve out your own country. I think it's important to be seen as a responsible player and as part of a solution to the region in order to gain support. And I think also internally, a lot of these movements are more interested in fighting in general, and also fighting rival movements than in creating a cohesive national movement. Now, within the Zionist movement, there were certainly groups that fought against each other at times, but that was seen as kind of these scars that stayed with us. And in general, there was enough unity around a goal that they could put their differences aside and cooperate toward that goal. What we've seen in the world, if I'm going to give some hope to some minorities that want to also carve out their own place in the world, is that we've seen the world become kind of these massive states or these multi-ethnic states break up, sometimes smoothly, sometimes not. But you have seen that the move is toward more autonomy for religious minorities, even in Europe, right? We've had talk about what will happen to Scotland, what will happen in parts of Spain. And there's other, certainly Yugoslavia, but there's other minorities who have different types of self-expression. So I think that's very important. And to do it through advocate, but to do it through peaceful means, and to do it to show that this can be another thriving democracy in regions that are desperately in need of more states that protect human rights, that want to be constructive players in the region. I think that is certainly very helpful.
And actually, the basic of this question is that these ethnic minorities are looking towards Israel as a secular democratic Jewish homeland. Okay, so the judiciary is a backbone, one of the pillars in the democracy, and I think it's like they were watching the Israel, that they didn't do anything foolish with their judiciary that will affect their homeland, which they regained after paying the heavy price of their in last 2000 years. So actually, they are watching towards what Israel is doing. Like Kurdistan is very sincere about their homeland, and they are learning from the Israeli experience and their history. And the same is doing every other community is talking about the Zionism. Actually, I'm from the Sikh community, and it's a new topic for us, that what is Zionism and why we need to learn from this movement. So I think that we need to look towards the judiciary very importantly, because it's a backbone of democracy, and we think we need to do something the Israelis need to do something with their democracy, that it didn't harm their nation in that process that they regained after so much.
And so thank you so much for your question. And it is fascinating because we have really, we've seen some groups on our college campuses as well, various minority groups from on many college campuses from different parts of the world. And we've actually heard that message before, Zionism as an inspiration to others. And it's really something that students should be aware of and should really try to work on as we create new relationships and do our work on our university campuses. So thank you so much for your question, and let me try to get as many questions in as we can here. And Aaliyah Schneider, thank you for your question in the chat here. And the question is on the situation in Gaza. Do you feel that there's a solution? Is the question. And if I could add to the question a little bit, an article I saw last week from Yaakov Katz, your fellow journalist in Israel, he said Israel needs to start thinking strategically about Gaza, which what he means is don't just respond, let's come up with a real long-term solution. I think the Israelis are tired of what's been just like you said, every year, every couple of years, another round of rocket fire, and it just seems like whack-a-mole. Try to stop it, and doesn't seem like there's a lot of hope, or I should say, a real plan to really stop it permanently. Is there any reason for hope here that it'll be over?
I'm going to be pessimistic on this one, sadly. I know Gaza very well. I was there before the disengagement. Most of my army service was there. So yeah, it's a place I'm familiar with, have a personal connection to. I think we've seen, if you think about, we've had 5 Israeli elections, and in most countries, if you had a entity next to you that was firing rockets, that had different armed groups that you've been to war with several times, that would be the main election issue. What am I going to do with that? And that really didn't come up in elections at all, because I don't think there's any difference across the political spectrum, the Zionist spectrum of politics, but what to do with Gaza. And I think there is a desire to not be forced to think of it. But hopefully there will be leadership that is more proactive. Now, you can go in 2 directions, right? You can go in the more military direction and say, we need to deal Hamas a final military blow, which means a ground invasion. And I'm sure many of Israel's regional partners would quietly love to see that. But that is going to be costly and problematic for a number of reasons. You'll have, missiles all over Israel. You lose perhaps hundreds of soldiers, and you would inflict significant harm to civilians in cities, and that's something that Israel has no desire to do. The other way is to move toward a more economic-based arrangement. I don't think Hamas is signing any recognition of Israel anytime, but there is openness for quiet in return for economic opportunity. That has been the arrangement since 2021, Garden of the Wall. So thousands of Gazan workers come into Israel for work, get a good salary. Hamas is supposed to make sure that there's no firing on Israel from anybody. And we see that Hamas has not done that, but I don't think Israel has played with the economic incentives and levers enough. But I think there needs to be a plan. There is some interest in the world to help with this. Maybe not enough that are serious, that really, are stakeholders there, but I think there needs to be a plan somehow that we can sideline Hamas, that there are economic opportunities for Gazans. But I think the main problem continues to be that Hamas wants to take over the Palestinian Authority, and they're the legitimate rulers or representatives of the Palestinians to the world, and Hamas wants to replace them, and they don't want to see Israel coming to any particular arrangement with Hamas. So getting rid of Hamas in some way or the other, I think, is going to have to happen before you'll see a real solution. But hopefully there's economic incentives that you can get to the people of Gaza in the meantime.
But Laser, would it be fair to challenge that and say, if Hamas was gone, we'd have somebody worse? I mean, I know it's a couple of years ago that would have sounded laughable, but we do have Palestinian Islamic Jihad there. There've even been reports of Al Qaeda cells over the years at times in Gaza. Is that, in your view, a realistic possibility?
No, it's not. I don't know what worse means. I don't think you get much worse than a very skilled and determined terror army with precision weapons and tunnels and tens of thousands of fighters that wants your destruction. To create something like that takes a long time. Palestinian Islamic Jihad is not even close to that. Certainly a couple of Al Qaeda cells are not even close to that either, much further away. So I think getting rid of Hamas would be a wonderful thing. Getting some responsible Palestinian leadership, a Palestinian Authority that's interested in their own people's prosperity would be a much better thing. Let's just not forget how this happened, that Hamas took over, right? So they won Palestinian elections, parliamentary elections in 06 and 07, they, by force, and I was watching with my own eyes, they killed and expelled Fatah members and took over the strip by force. And that's why we are where we are. So this certainly shouldn't be something that we see as legitimate or something that we have to live with.
Interesting. Next question from Ben Holtzman. And we'll have time for 2 more questions here. Ben, go ahead if you'd like to turn your camera on. And we'd appreciate it. And you have it. If not, go ahead and just turn on your microphone and
Sure, let's
go
see.
ahead.
There we go.
Welcome.
Hey, how you doing? Proudly a member of Hasbara. I did the 2021 trip in August. My question is, you answered part of this, but I wanted to answer the other. I wanted to ask the other side of this. You talked about how others in the region and around the world are viewing Israel right now, but could you speak a little bit more to how Israel's ability to conduct foreign policy is affected by the domestic upheaval? Is Benjamin Netanyahu more likely to pursue aggressive foreign policy? I ask this because I think it's such a critical time in the region. Obviously, the Saudi-Iran deal is somewhat important, but most importantly, the perception, though not the reality, that the U.S. is leaving the region. How is Israeli foreign policy and the ability to conduct Israeli foreign policy affected by domestic upheaval?
Sure. And you might study international relations or something, because that's like a classic theory question. Benjamin Netanyahu is not an aggressive leader in any way. He's conservative. He doesn't like to go to war. He doesn't like to do things that are unpredictable. What he does like to do is quietly work. Most aggressive is diplomacy, finding new partners. I guess the subtext there is, how likely is Israel to strike Iran if Israel does, if America doesn't? I still don't think that's very likely at all. And I don't think Israel's in any mood to be especially adventurous in foreign policy in terms of security operations.
Oh, and I don't know, is that just on my end? I think Loser,
We
maybe
lost the sound.
Sound
I'm
got
back.
lost now. Okay, you were just building up to the punchline here.
All right, so there are challenges to Israel in terms of its foreign policy, in that you haven't seen the high-level invites, let's say, from its Arab partners. You haven't seen Netanyahu or foreign minister be invited to Abu Dhabi or Manama or to Morocco, and you haven't seen any of their leaders come to Israel. So there are limits, but those are kind of long-term things. They want this current unrest to pass. They want to be more sure about the direction of this government, and then they'll be happy to do that. But I don't think you're going to see military adventures from this government at all.
All right, thank you for that. And we'll have our last question here, which is from the chat. Ben, thank you for your question. And Shmuel Taub here, asking you to please address the recent visit made by and this was on my list of questions that I never got to. Thank you, Shmuel. If you could talk about the recent visit by the Iranian crown prince to Israel. Does that send a signal to the current regime in Iran? For those who may have not been following, is the crown prince would be the son of the late Shah, who was ousted from power in 1979 in Iran. And he visited Israel in what was a pretty high-profile visit, about a month ago. And does that send some sort of message to the Ayatollah and the government in Iran now?
It's an interesting question, because I've been told that, so Saudis and Iran made up in Beijing, and the Saudis had their pretty clear demands from the Iranians, especially around proxy attacks on the Saudis. And the question is, what do the Iranians want? And I've been told that the first Iranian concern was that the Saudis had to work for the shutdown of Iran International, which is an opposition media network, and it shows how uneasy the regime is by this Iranian exile or diaspora community that wants and works to bring down the regime. So they're probably more unsettled by that visit than we think. They pay very close attention to Israel, and there's always a fear that Israel could strike tomorrow. So there probably is a fear there. I think that's pretty unfounded. I mean, we know that that's not going to affect Israeli policy. We also know that I think it's a good reminder that the Iranian people are, there's not a history of anti-Semitism there. Under the Shah, they were quite pro-Israel. The Iranian diaspora is quite friendly to Jews and to Israel as well. So, it's certainly a natural partnership. And hopefully it's a reminder that, were it not for this current regime, it would be one of Israel's closest allies in the region. as it was before the revolution. So that's where I see the significance of that visit.
Laser, thank you for that, and thanks for all of your answers here, Laser, and really helping us think about all of these issues that are really on everybody's mind, and it's helpful to be able to come together and talk about them. And so thank you for that. And just want to remind everyone, we are doing these virtual leadership sessions here every couple of months, and so please look out for the next one. I'll also just remind everyone, especially the students on the line, that the Hasbara Fellows delegation in Israel just landed today with students all over Canada and the US. The next one comes next week. Laser, you'll be speaking to them. But we still have some spots left for August, and applications are open for December as well. So Ben, I see you. I see Adam. I see other Hasbara Fellows on the line here. Please remind your peers to apply, and anyone who's a pro-Israel or Jewish leader on a college campus anywhere in Canada or the US, Hasbara is for them. So please let them know. And for everybody on the line, please, we'll be sending updates. So you'll get some emails. We won't, not too many, just to spare everybody's inbox, but you'll get some updates as the students do their pro-Israel activism training in Israel. And for more frequent updates, just go to our Instagram page or our Facebook. There'll be pictures, there'll be videos. There might be one of Laser speaking at the Knesset to the students next week. And so thank you all. I want to thank everybody on the call. For those of you in our donor network, thank you for what you do, participating, helping us make all of this work possible. And for all the students on the line, thank you for being part of Hasbara and for being on the front lines on your university campuses. And I'll be looking forward to our next chance to touch base and continuing to work together. So thank you, everyone, and talk soon.